It was the morning of August 17th, and Bert the Arlesdale engine was just arriving at Bridge Street station. As he stopped alongside the platform, he spotted a familiar face waiting amongst the passengers.
Well, if it isn't Mr. Hatt. Good morning, sir.
Charlie Hatt smiled at the miniature engine. It had been a couple of months since he and his crew had filmed the Arlesdale Railway for their TV series.
Hello, Bert. Good to see you again.
What brings you down this way, Mr. Hatt? Surely you're not filming another one of your documentaries?
I am indeed, Bert. It's about a lost engine this time.
A lost engine? But we're not missing anyone.
It's nothing to do with your railway, Bert. I'm here looking for Atlas, one of the mid-Sodor engines.
One of the mid-Sodor engines? But they've not been around these parts for decades. What makes you think this Atlas is down here?
Bert asked, as Charlie and his producer climbed aboard his train.
Atlas was the mid-Sodor Railway's number 5, a small engine designed for working around mines. When we interviewed the former mid-Sodor engines, they told us he was bought by a zinc mine near Craigbure. He was to be used on the mine company's tramway to take zinc down to the harbour at Harwick. So after we filmed you here, we headed up north to investigate that tramway.
I see. I take it Atlas wasn't there?
Indeed he wasn't. There we were, cameras rolling and me doing a piece to camera. We thought it would be like Duke's discovery, but captured on film this time. But all we found was some spare parts. We managed to track down a local who had worked at the mine until it closed in 1953. He was able to tell us that Atlas had been sent back where he came from, but he couldn't remember the details.
1953? But those were the dark days.
Dark days?
Oh, that's what the locals called it, when there was no railway service around here between 1947 and 1966. The dark days are over, they said when we first started running. I understand the roads around here weren't too good back then.
I see.
Bert sighed.
I'm afraid we may not be much help to you, Mr. Hatt, given that was before our time. But I could ask the others if they might have heard or seen anything about Atlas.
Thank you, Bert. I would appreciate that.
Charlie and his producer got off at Arlesdale. They were visiting the old mid-Sodor railway sheds, which were just a short distance out of town. Bert spread the word amongst the other engines when he got the chance. All of them thought hard, but couldn't recall hearing anything about Atlas at all. From the Blister twins and Sigrid, all the way up to Drock and Olivia, each and every Arlesdale engine drew a blank. But unfortunately, they wouldn't have that long to dwell on it. Just after lunchtime, the western side of Sodor was engulfed in a fierce storm. Rex had been between Bridge Street and Arlesborough when it had hit. As he pulled in next to the station, he noticed that there wasn't a soul to be seen. Even the station master had taken refuge, just sticking a megaphone out of his office window. Rex didn't blame him.
Rex, just leave your trucks there. Take shelter in the shed with the others.
You don't have to tell me twice.
Rex quickly took cover in the shed with some of the other engines.
I'm glad to see you're alright, Rex.
Blister 2 said, casting a worried glance out the doors. Rex immediately guessed what was on the little diesel's mind.
I saw Jock and Blister 1 up at Bridge Street. They'll have sheltered in the workshops there.
That still leaves Mike, Bert and Sigrid unaccounted for.
Rex considered their timetable.
Mike will be up at Peel Godred. You can shelter in the tunnel under the town. Bert should be now casting Cowan. The timetable calls him to be there in 5 minutes.
Up in the mountains? Oh, I hope he's not going to push on.
Yes, we don't want him to put a rock slide or something.
Indeed. What about Sigrid?
I'm not sure. Her schedule's mostly goods extras. I just hope she's somewhere safe.
Me too.
Rex glanced over at the other engines. With the storm affecting their radios, they were unable to contact the other locomotives. Maybe a change of topic was needed to take their minds off the situation.
So, what do you think of this Atlas thing Bert mentioned?
Well, it could be somewhere around here. I mean, there's that section of old Sodor railway track down from Arlesdale.
That was turned into a walking trail years ago, B2. There aren't any other steam engines round here. I think Mr. Hatt's gone on a bit of a wild goose chase.
Hold on, Frank. I don't think that's quite accurate.
What are you getting at, Olivia?
Do you remember when I rescued you on my first day here? We stopped near Marthwaite and that old steam mill building started talking to us. It gave me a bit of a shock, and you explained it was actually a steam engine inside the mill with whom we were conversing.
Oh yes, I'd forgotten about that. But Old Mill's not exactly a railway engine though. I mean, he's been in place there for decades.
Yes, he has been there for decades, hasn't he? According to what Bert told us, Atlas was sent back down this way in 1953. Old Mill would have been here since before then. He may know something though.
We'll have to ask him next time we get up to Marthwaite.
Rex looked up as thunder rumbled overhead.
That may be a little while yet. I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of cleaning up to do after this.
Rex had been right. Once the storm had passed, they found it had left quite a mess across the railway. Trees, leaves and debris littered the line. The little engines didn't waste any time, quickly starting to clean up. Fortunately, there hadn't been any major damage. With Mike, Sigrid and Bert working from the Peel Godred end of the line, and the rest from the other, the cleanup progressed quickly. It was mid-afternoon by the time the line was clear to Marthwaite. Blister 1 was the first engine to get there. He stopped just before the station, where a large tree had fallen across the line.
Harry, I think this is where you and your crew come in.
Alright, you heard the engine. As the workers got their equipment ready, another voice spoke up.
How bad was the storm damage for you, Blister?
With quite a bit of debris, Mr. Duncan doesn't expect to get full services running for a day or so. How about...
Blister 1's words died on his lips as he caught sight of the mill building. It seemed that the Arlesdale engines had gotten off relatively lightly. While they'd only had minor damage and debris, the mill building had had its roof ripped off, and part of one wall was missing.
Old Mill? Are you alright?
I'm fine, Blister. I've been through worse. I once had lightning strike my funnel, you know.
Really?
Yes, it was quite a shock.
I see. But what about this damage to your building? I mean, you've got a whole museum built around you.
Indeed. While I've escaped damage, I'm afraid the rest of the museum hasn't been so lucky. There's some slight flooding in here.
Will the museum volunteers be able to repair it?
They're talking to our insurance company now. Once we know what our policy will pay out, we'll know what we can afford to repair.
Oh, I understand. I hope it goes well.
Blister 1 knew that the Old Mill Museum was a non-profit organisation, run entirely by volunteers.
Thank you, Blister.
By this point, the workmen had finished clearing the line. Blister 1, could you go and check the line ahead?
Of course.
Blister 1 was quickly uncoupled, and he cautiously moved ahead to check the line. He returned a few minutes later. That was quick.
Couldn't really go too far. There's a washout about half a mile ahead.
Right, we'll need to get some ballast and rails. The workman quickly climbed back aboard the train, and Blister 1 departed. As he did so, he couldn't help feeling worried about the old mill. The steam engine inside was a good friend of the Arlesdale engines, and Blister 1 hoped he would be alright. Jock was waiting when the little diesel arrived at Farquhar Road to collect supplies.
You look worried, Blister 1.
There's been some damage to the old mill building up at Marthwaite,
replied Blister 1, and he explained what he had seen.
What? How bad is the damage?
It's slightly flooded, but Old Mill, the steam engine I mean, he's been through worse.
What do you mean?
Blister 1 repeated what Old Mill had told him about the lightning strike.
That's odd. He definitely said his funnel.
That's what he said, yeah.
But surely his building has a chimney, not a funnel. Also, the whole structure looks like it's made out of stone and wood. They're not exactly the most conductive of materials.
You're right. That is odd.
A moment later, Jock departed with his work train. He was heading for one of the ballast mines to repair it after the storm. A few minutes later, Blister 1 had shunted his flat cars of rails, and he headed off. He'd been thinking while doing his shunting, and he'd realised there was something he needed to ask. A short while later, Blister 1 reached Marthwaite. He had to run around his train before he could proceed to the washout. As he did so, he glanced over at the old mill.
Old Mill, may I ask you something?
Certainly, Blister.
You said you were once shocked by a lightning strike on your funnel, but you've only got a stone chimney. At least you do now. May I ask, were you once an engine like us?
I was indeed, Blister. When my railway closed, I was brought back down here to replace the mill's original boiler. It was getting old. My name back then was...
Atlas!
Yes. Nobody's called me that name for decades, Blister. How did you come to know it now?
Charlie Hatt told us. He's looking for you.
Charlie Hatt? He's that TV host, isn't he? Rex and Mike told me he was making a documentary about you a couple of months ago.
He's trying to find you for another episode of it.
That could be helpful.
Helpful?
It seems that our insurance hasn't covered as much as we hoped. We'll be able to repair this building and the floor, but that's about it.
But what about the displays?
The volunteers are going to have to restore them. That will take a chunk out of the museum's budget. There's a chance we may have to close.
We can't have that.
Indeed. If Mr. Hatt does do a bit about me here, the publicity could bring more visitors and donations.
I see. We'll make sure to tell him next time we see him.
Before he could say any more, Blister 1 had to leave. The little diesel moved off, still worried about the old mill's fate. Hopefully, Charlie Hatt would be able to help, thought the little diesel. He would have to ask the small controller to pass a message on to the TV host. The little engines worked all through the night, and by the next morning, the line was clear up to Arlesdale. When Blister 1 reached Arlesdale station, he was glad to see Charlie Hatt waiting on the platform.
Good morning, Blister 1. Your controller said you wanted to see me?
Yes, we found Atlas, Mr. Hatt.
What? Where?
He's inside the old steam mill at Marthwaite. You know, that one that's become a museum. He replaced the original steam boiler.
I see. I heard they took some damage from the storm. At least, that's what the other volunteers told me.
Other volunteers?
Alan, that's my producer, and I were helping clean up around here yesterday afternoon. The old mill, you say?
A few months ago, Charlie had visited the Skarloey Railway to interview Duke, Sir Handel and Peter Sam. While he had been talking to them, Rusty had expressed concern about the reliability of the other diesel used to look after the line. It had sounded as though another engine was needed.
I wonder. Maybe the Thin controller could help.
The Thin controller?
He's in charge of the Skarloey Railway. I think he could use another engine. If he buys Atlas from the museum, the money could help with their repairs.
That sounds good, Mr. Hatt. I think old Atlas, would like that too. Been able to run on rails again,
I better call Mr. Sam then.
As Blister 1 headed off to continue his cleanup, Charlie pulled out his phone.
Mr. Sam, Charlie Hatt here. I was just wondering, could you use an extra engine?
Later that evening, operations were beginning to get back to normal on the Arlesdale Railway. Most of the debris from the storm had been cleared away, and the Blister twins were bringing the last of it down to be disposed of. As they approached Marthwaite station, they spotted a strange steam engine on a flat container next to Sigrid. He was around the same size as them, but his wheels were wider.
Sigrid, what's going on?
Blisters, this is Atlas. I've just been helping the workmen get him out of the mill.
Oh, I see. Nice to meet you, Atlas.
That's what you two look like. I must say, it's a pleasure to meet you in person, so to speak.
So the Skarloey Railway did buy you then?
Yes. They're going to provide the museum here with a working replica of the original boiler, as well as funds to help with the rebuilding.
I'm glad to hear it worked out.
We'll miss having you here though, Atlas.
Same here, Sigrid. This isn't the first time I've said farewell to friends, and that doesn't make it easier.
We miss you too, Atlas. But you're going to see your old friends and get to be a really useful engine again. Isn't that a good thing?
The question seemed to cheer up Atlas.
Most of my old friends, yes. I have missed them. Even those like Stanley, Andrews and Drolland, who I wouldn't really call friends.
Atlas's face fell again.
But I will miss you, little engines. Mike complaining about coaches, Fred grumbling about work, the sounds of all you passing by. You've kept me company during these years, and I do appreciate it.
An awkward silence fell, with none of the engines quite sure what to say next.
I understand it was you who told Mr. Hatt that I was here.
Well, he was looking for you.
But in that case, I should be saying thank you.
We're glad we were able to help.
A moment later, the signal cleared and the blisters departed. As they headed off, they couldn't help having mixed feelings. They were going to miss Atlas, they had no doubt about that. But on the other hand, they were happy that he'd be able to see his old friends again. From what Charlie Hatt had said, it had sounded like they could use Atlas's help. Back at Marthwaite, Atlas could see that Sigrid still seemed to be a little down.
Don't worry, Sigrid. We'll still hear about each other, I'm sure. I mean, I've heard news of my old friends, even though they didn't know I was here.
Really?
Yes. In fact, I just saw one of them on the front of a newspaper one of the museum volunteers was reading yesterday.
Before Sigrid could say any more, they heard a lorry's horn.
Looks like my ride's here.
Yes. Good luck, Atlas. I hope everything goes well for you.
Thank you, Sigrid. Could you please say farewell to the others for me? I'm not really going to get a chance myself.
Of course.
Sigrid replied, and with that, she departed. A short while later, Atlas had been loaded onto Hugh, and the container lorry set off. They were bound for Arlesdale, where Atlas would be put onto an overnight train to Croydon's Gate. As they headed off, Atlas wondered what this Skarloey railway would be like. He was looking forward to finding out, but I'm afraid to say it wouldn't exactly be smooth sailing. I shan't say any more though, or I'll spoil the next story.